I was standing in the university parking lot in my cap and gown when my mother pulled me aside. Her smile was the kind she wore when she wanted something to look easy that was not. My father adjusted his tie nearby. My sister Madison fixed her curls. My mother leaned close and whispered what I had heard in different forms my entire life. Please don't embarrass the family today. Walk across the stage quietly. No crying. No dramatic speeches. Let Madison enjoy this too. My name is Patricia Morgan. I am 27 years old. I had just earned my master's degree after 7 years of working overnight hospital shifts, studying in my car during lunch breaks, and rebuilding my life from a foundation my family never tried to understand. Madison was not graduating. She was there as the daughter my parents liked to display. My mother reminded me I had taken too long to finish school, that people would ask questions, and that my hospital job was nothing worth mentioning. I swallowed every word. I walked inside and sat near the back where they told me to sit. Then the dean stepped to the podium, looked across the auditorium, and said, "Before we begin, I'd like Patricia Morgan to stand up first." Everyone turned. My mother's face went pale. Before I could rise from my seat, my mind went back through everything that morning had already cost me. My family had almost not come. My mother said attending was awkward because Madison's engagement party had been the night before, and my father complained about parking fees near campus. Madison told me I should be grateful they bothered to show up. They made me drive separately. My mother said there was not enough room in the family SUV with Madison's fiancé Daniel riding along. That was a lie. There was space for 2 more people. They simply did not want me in the pre-ceremony photos. Inside the auditorium, they chose seats far to the left, away from where families of Hana Rays were supposed to sit. My mother claimed the reserved area was full, but I had watched her walk past a clearly marked row bearing my name on the seat card. I sat alone among strangers and told myself it was fine. Now the dean was calling my name across a full auditorium, and the reserved row my mother deliberately passed made sudden, complete sense. It was never meant for ordinary guests. It was meant for the family of the person the university had been preparing all morning to honor. I rose slowly, unsure why the applause was already building before I had even made it to the aisle. The dean announced I was receiving the university's highest graduate honor, awarded for academic excellence, community leadership, and a research project that had fundamentally changed how the local school district identified and supported students from low-income families. The room erupted with sound. My mother froze in her seat like someone who had just been caught with the wrong expression on her face. Madison leaned toward Daniel and whispered something I could not hear. My father looked down at his printed program for the first time all morning and found my name listed on the very first page. Then the dean added one more sentence that made my mother's shoulders go rigid. Patricia Morgan will also be delivering today's student address. My mother's hand rose slowly to her mouth. Because less than 15 minutes earlier, standing in that parking lot under a bright morning sky, she had told me quietly but firmly not to embarrass the family today. Now 250 guests, several university officials, and every professor who had watched me earn this degree were turning in their seats, waiting for me to walk to that podium and speak. I walked toward the stage with my hands trembling slightly beneath the fabric of my gown. I had prepared a careful speech. Nothing bitter. Nothing pointed at anyone by name. But as I climbed the steps to the podium, I thought about every night I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage studying between shifts. Every time my mother called my degree a late start. Every family dinner where Madison's smallest win became a toast and my biggest ones received silence or a subject change. I began calmly. I spoke about second chances, quiet persistence, and the kind of work people do in rooms where no one ever claps. The audience listened. My mother shifted in her seat more than once because she understood precisely who I was describing, even though I never said her name aloud. Then I thanked the one person who had truly believed in me. Professor Elaine Mercer, my faculty advisor, who had found me crying alone in the library 2 years earlier and told me something I had replayed 100 times since, "You are not behind. You are becoming." The applause was long and genuine. When I looked toward my family, Madison was not clapping. She was staring at Professor Mercer with an expression I could not immediately name. After the ceremony ended, Families gathered outside in the afternoon light for photographs. Strangers congratulated me. The professors embraced me warmly. Former classmates introduced me to their parents and pointed me out as someone worth knowing. My mother performed happiness the way she always did at public events, smiling at exactly the right moments, accepting compliments that belonged to me, nodding as though she had been expecting all of this. Then Professor Mercer walked over to join our small group. My mother stiffened in a way that had nothing to do with the brightness of the sun. Madison's fiancé Daniel stepped forward and said, "Dr. Mercer." Professor Mercer's smile shifted slightly. She clearly recognized him. But not as Madison's fiancé. She knew him from somewhere connected to a university grant committee that had been tied to my research project 2 years earlier. Madison took Daniel's arm and steered him sideways. But I caught the look of alarm on her face before she turned. Something was wrong. Something older than this morning. I had spent 2 years protecting my achievements by keeping them secret from my family. I thought the secret was my degree. Standing there in the light, I understood for the first time that the secret was much larger. My mother insisted on a family photograph right after the ceremony. She tried to arrange it with Madison placed in the center and me standing to the side, still wearing my full academic regalia as though I were decoration in someone else's moment. Even Daniel looked visibly uncomfortable. Professor Mercer watched quietly from several feet away. My mother said, "Trish, move over just a bit. Madison's dress is catching the light better from where you're standing." That was when the university photographer stepped forward. "The honoree should be centered," he said simply. The word honoree settled over the group like a quiet ruling. Everyone standing nearby heard it. For the first time that entire day, the people around me rearranged themselves in relation to where I was standing. My mother's smile tightened at the corners in a way she could not fully control. Madison looked toward the ground. My father glanced between us with the slow expression of a man realizing he had spent years standing on the wrong side of something important. Then the photographer asked whether I wanted a photograph with my family. I looked at them. My mother's careful smile. Madison's stiff posture. My father's uncertain eyes. For the first time in my life, I heard myself say, "Maybe later." After the ceremony wrapped up, my mother announced cheerfully that they had lunch reservations at a restaurant downtown. I felt the tight knot in my shoulders begin to loosen, until she added, "We only booked 5 seats. We assumed your part of the ceremony would be shorter, and Madison has plans for the afternoon." 5 seats. My parents, Madison, Daniel, and Daniel's mother. Not me. My own graduation lunch did not include a seat for me. Before I could find the right words, Professor Mercer stepped quietly beside me and said, "Patricia is expected at the faculty reception. The dean specifically requested her presence." My mother blinked. She was suddenly aware of being observed by someone with institutional standing, and her expression shifted into the performance she kept for those moments. Madison muttered that I was making things awkward. My father said nothing at all. Then Daniel turned to me and asked, "Trish, is your research the Morgan Community Grant Project?" I went very still. I had never once mentioned the name or subject of my research to my family. Not the title. Not the focus. Not the school district involvement. I had kept every detail private specifically to protect it. Daniel should not have known that name. At the faculty reception, Daniel found me near the coffee station and apologized quietly for asking in front of everyone. He explained that his company had helped co-sponsor a community education grant the previous year. A finalist application listed under the name P. Morgan had been rejected after a private complaint was filed claiming the applicant had misrepresented personal and family financial hardship in her materials. I set down my coffee cup carefully. That complaint had nearly ended everything I had built. I spent 3 months in a formal appeal, submitting pay stubs, bank statements, rent records, and work schedules to prove that every single line of my original application was completely accurate. The university restored my funding only after Professor Mercer formally requested a full independent review of the complaint and its claims. Daniel said Madison had once casually mentioned to him that I exaggerated poverty for personal attention. I stood still for a moment. My sister had not only dismissed my education in private family conversations. She had possibly helped file a formal complaint designed to strip my scholarship and end my research before anyone outside our family ever had the chance to see what I was building. My mind moved backward 2 years to when I decided to return to school after losing my teaching assistant position during district budget cuts. I was renting a single small room. I was working overnight hospital shifts. I was sending out applications quietly because sharing my plans with my family had stopped being worth the cost. Every time I had brought something hopeful home, it came back smaller. They had a talent for that. Not through cruelty that left marks, but through the kind of steady, casual doubt that wears a person down the same way water shapes stone. When my graduate acceptance arrived, my mother barely looked up from her coffee. She said, "Graduate school, Trish? What you need is stability, not another excuse to delay your actual life." Madison laughed and asked if I was planning to become one of those inspiring late bloomer stories people post about online. That night, I came close to deleting the acceptance email entirely. The next morning, Professor Mercer called and told me I had also been awarded a partial academic scholarship based on my application materials. It was the first time in years that someone told me I had real potential without needing something from me in return. After Professor Mercer's call, I made a deliberate decision. I stopped sharing anything important with my family. I did not tell them when I made the dean's list. I said nothing when my research proposal was selected for the district review panel. I kept quiet when the pilot program launched in 3 schools and teachers began sending feedback that students were actually responding. I did not mention when a state education committee cited my paper in a formal recommendation. In the beginning, this was not about building toward anything. It was simply about survival. My mother could not minimize what she did not know existed. Madison could not reach something she had never been told about. The safest version of my work was the version they had no access to. But graduation day changed everything. All those layers of careful silence fell away in a single morning, and what was underneath them turned out to be more than I had let myself imagine. My family had come to my graduation embarrassed that I was there at all. By the time the dean called my name, they were sitting in those same seats embarrassed that I had become someone they could not quietly explain away. That difference told me everything I had needed to know for years. Professor Mercer pulled me aside near the end of the faculty reception. She told me she had been holding something back and that, in light of what Daniel had shared, she believed I needed to hear it fully. The university had kept the complete complaint records from my grant appeal. She had chosen not to show them to me while the review was still open because she did not want the information to break my concentration during the most important academic period of my life. But she had never destroyed them. The complaint had been filed under an anonymous name. But the document contained family details that no one outside my immediate household would have had access to. My exact work schedule at the hospital. My monthly rent amount, written out precisely. The specific texture of my relationship with my parents. And a phrase, emotional dramatics, that my mother used about me regularly, sometimes in front of other people. My chest tightened around a breath I could not quite release. It could have been Madison who sent it. It could have been my mother. Professor Mercer said quietly, "You won cleanly, Patricia. Every finding supported you. But someone who knew you closely tried very seriously to make sure you did not." The night before graduation had been Madison's engagement party at a private garden restaurant in the city. My mother had insisted I attend even though I needed to wake early for the ceremony. I went because refusing would have cost more than going. My mother introduced Madison to each arriving guest with visible pleasure and said nothing about my degree when anyone asked what I did. When one guest pressed the question directly, my mother answered for me, "Trish is still figuring things out." I had my master's hood folded in the back seat of my car, parked 2 blocks away. I was graduating with academic honors and delivering the student address the following morning. And my mother still introduced me to a room full of people as someone unfinished. At the end of the evening, Madison hugged me in front of several guests and whispered close to my ear, "Try not to make tomorrow weird. Mom is already stressed enough." At the time I took it as a request to keep the peace. Looking back now with everything I had learned that day, I understood it differently. They were not afraid I would fail at graduation. They were afraid that I would finally be seen. The dean invited my family into a small reception room after the ceremony. My mother adjusted her expression and stepped forward to introduce herself with warmth she had not shown me all morning. She called me our Trish as though she had not spent hours treating me like a problem. The dean congratulated my parents and said they must be very proud. He mentioned my research had reached state-level education discussions, unusual for a master's candidate. My father's mouth opened slightly. He looked at my mother in a way that asked whether he was supposed to have already known this. My mother said, "Well, she has always been determined." I heard the careful distance in that word. As if my determination had happened somewhere outside the family, on its own. Then the dean said warmly, "We were especially grateful for her thoroughness and honesty throughout the grant review process." The room shifted. Madison looked at the floor. My mother's smile slipped before she caught it. The dean had no idea what he had just described. He was expressing genuine appreciation. He did not know he had just identified the very process my family had tried to destroy. He had struck a match without knowing there was anything to burn. Daniel found me in the hallway after the reception cleared and spoke quietly. He said he remembered the grant complaint in more detail than he had shared earlier outside. He said the written complaint had been unusually personal. It included private family information that felt less like a formal academic concern and more like something written by someone who knew the applicant closely and personally. He also said that after the complaint was filed, someone called his company's foundation office asking whether grant funding could be redirected to a different education nonprofit if my application was formally disqualified. I held that detail quietly without speaking. Madison had announced plans to launch a children's literacy foundation after the wedding, despite never having worked a day in education or non-profits. My mother had spent months describing this as evidence of Madison's generous and civic-minded heart. I finally saw the full shape of what had been happening. They did not only want me quiet and invisible. They wanted my work, my field, and my community credibility cleared away before Madison tried to build something in that same space. Daniel's expression was no longer that of a proud fiancé. He looked like a man carefully reviewing everything he thought he knew about who he was marrying. My mother cornered me in the corridor outside the reception room. She had her voice dropped and her face arranged into the expression she used when she wanted to appear reasonable while making an ultimatum. "Do not start digging into things you do not fully understand," she said. "Today went well for you. Be grateful for that and leave it alone." That single sentence confirmed everything I needed to know. I asked her directly whether she had filed the complaint or helped someone else do so. She did not answer the question. Instead she said that Madison had worked hard to be where she was, that I had always been overly emotional and made situations more complicated than they needed to be, and that sometimes a family had to make choices about protecting its future. I let the words settle before I responded. She had not mentioned my future. She had said the family's future, and the family's future, in her mind, had always meant Madison. Before I could say anything else, my father Thomas appeared in the corridor behind her. His face said he had heard enough to know something serious and ugly had happened inside this family before today. He asked her quietly, "Carolyn, what did you do?" My father Thomas had never been the loudest person in my story. But that was not the same as being innocent. He had stayed quiet while my mother built the family's identity around Madison. He had called his silence neutrality and his absence balance. He forgot school events, missed milestones, and described my hurt feelings as sensitivity whenever I tried to bring them to him. Standing in that corridor, he looked genuinely shaken for what I believe was the first time. I told him everything I knew. The grant, the appeal, the 3 months of documentation, the anonymous complaint filled with details only someone inside our household would carry. I watched the color drain from his face slowly as I spoke. My mother interrupted to insist she had only made a few phone calls. She said she believed I was using family hardship to gain sympathy points on an academic application. A few calls. Those calls had nearly ended my degree, my funding, and the community program already helping real students in 3 schools. My father said in a low voice, "You tried to take her scholarship." That was when Madison stepped into the corridor and said the sentence that ended her ability to claim any innocence. It wasn't like she deserved it more than me. Everyone turned toward Madison. She understood too late what she had said out loud. She broke down, but not from guilt or genuine regret. What came out of her was something that had been building for years, organized, bitter resentment dressed as pain. She said I had always received sympathy because I struggled visibly, while she had to perform perfection without ever receiving the same kind of emotional credit. She said my research made her look shallow beside me. She said Daniel's family placed deep value on real education and community work, and that my sudden public success made people quietly wonder what Madison had actually built with all of her advantages. Then she admitted she had told my mother about my grant application and had actively encouraged her to contact the university to verify my financial claims. My mother moved to interrupt. But Daniel had already stepped backward from where he was standing. He removed his arm from Madison's waist quietly, without a scene. And just like that, the golden daughter was standing in a corridor with no fiancé beside her, no perfect image holding, and the truth she had finally said out loud hanging in the air between us where no one could take it back. Madison recovered quickly and pivoted with the speed of someone who had practiced deflection her entire life. She accused me of using graduation day to destroy her engagement out of long-held jealousy. She said I had always resented her. She said I had manipulated the dean, Professor Mercer, and Daniel into feeling sorry for me by playing the role of the mistreated sister. For one frightening moment my mother regained control of the hallway. She began crying loudly, saying this was precisely what she had meant about not wanting me to embarrass the family today. People nearby stopped and looked over. Voices dropped in the corridor. It was the same trap I had been stepping into my entire life. Make me appear unstable. Make my account of events look like an emotional performance. Make the documented truth look like wounded feelings. But this time I did not raise my voice. I took out my phone and opened an email from Professor Mercer that I had saved months earlier. The subject line read, "Final Review Findings, Morgan Grant Appeal." The official university document was 17 pages long. My financial records were fully verified. My research was original. The complaint had contained no factual basis on any point. I held the screen out in the silence and said nothing more. I did not take any of this public. Doing so would have made me exactly the problem my mother had always tried to frame me as, dramatic, using private family pain as spectacle. That was never what I wanted. Instead I asked the dean, Professor Mercer, Daniel, my parents, and Madison to step into a private office down the hall. The dean agreed immediately. His expression told me he already understood that something significant was unfolding right in front of him. Inside, I presented the university's official appeal findings calmly and in order. The complaint had no valid basis on any point. My financial documentation was accurate and fully verified. My research was original and had been independently confirmed. The anonymous accusations had wasted university administrative resources and nearly damaged an education project already producing real, measurable results inside local schools. The dean said the university could not take social action against my family, but it could and would correct the complete official record and close the file in my favor. He also confirmed my research had been formally recommended for a paid fellowship position with the State Education Board. My mother's hands gripped the edge of her chair. She had not stopped my future. She had given the university every reason to document exactly why I deserved one. Daniel's mother Eleanor asked to speak before anyone left the room. She sat straight and her voice was measured and clear in the way of someone who had made a decision before entering. She said her family's foundation had been in discussions about partnering with Madison's proposed literacy nonprofit. That partnership was no longer something her family could support. She explained that her foundation did not build relationships with work that had been founded on the undermining of someone else's genuine education effort. Madison said it had been a family tension issue, nothing more. My mother said Madison should not lose opportunities over what amounted to a misunderstanding. Eleanor replied without raising her voice, "Character is not a misunderstanding." Daniel did not make a scene. He did not issue an announcement. He simply told Madison that he needed time away from the engagement because he could no longer trust who she was when nobody important was watching her. Madison looked at me with an anger that had nowhere to go. I had not taken anything from her. I had not planned any of this outcome. I had simply told the truth in a room where the right people were paying careful attention. Her own choices, made year by year over a long time, had brought her to this exact moment. The dean formally announced at the private reception that I had been selected as the first recipient of a new year-long education leadership fellowship. It carried a meaningful salary, active partnerships with multiple public school districts, and the full institutional support I needed to expand my pilot program to reach students across the entire state. My father cried. He did not do it dramatically or loudly. It was one quiet tear he tried to hide by turning slightly toward the window while everyone else was looking toward me. But I was watching him and I saw it clearly. He said, "Trish, I truly did not know any of this existed." I looked at him and said, "You never asked." That landed differently than anything I had ever argued with him about before. I watched his face change, not defensive, not explaining itself. Just honest. He had chosen the comfort of distance over the effort of paying real attention for years, and he knew it without my help. My mother, working quickly to recover whatever she could from the room, said this was truly wonderful news for the whole family. I answered her clearly, "No, Mom. It is wonderful for me." That evening, my mother called and said they were converting the lunch reservation into a graduation dinner. There was now room for everyone. There would be photos. There would be a proper celebration. Her voice had the particular warmth she only found when she needed something to still go her way. I held the phone for a moment. I felt the old familiar pull, the habit built over years of showing up to keep peace, of saying yes to prove I was not difficult, of letting my family attach themselves to things they had tried to prevent. Then I thought about the 5 seats. The whisper in the parking lot. The complaint is filled with my private life details. The years of silence I had maintained just to protect my work from being worn down into nothing at the family dinner table. I told her no. I went to dinner instead with Professor Mercer, 2 classmates, and a former student from my pilot program who brought me a handmade card that said, "You helped me believe I could finish school too." I held that card for a long time. When I stepped outside the restaurant afterward, my mother was standing on the sidewalk. She had not come to apologize. My mother told me Madison's engagement was hanging by a thread and that Daniel's family had pulled back from all the foundation discussions. She needed me to call Eleanor and explain that the complaint was really just a family misunderstanding. She needed me to help protect Madison's reputation before everything fell apart completely. I asked her, "Did Madison protect mine?" She said, "She's your sister." I said, "And I'm your daughter." My mother stood on that sidewalk without an elegant response for the first time in my memory. I watched her search for one and come up empty. Then she said the cruelest sentence I heard her say that entire day, "You know Madison cannot handle public failure the way you can." I stood very still when those words landed. She had spent my whole life treating my ability to survive difficulty as a permission slip. My resilience was not something she felt proud of. It was something she had leaned on as a reason to keep giving me less, to keep asking more, to keep expecting me to absorb whatever the family needed. I told her no simply and clearly. Then I walked back inside before her guilt could find a new shape and follow me through the door. A month later, the university hosted a formal honors banquet to publicly announce the fellowship recipients. I almost did not invite my family. My father called and asked quietly if he could attend. Just him. I said yes. My mother and Madison came anyway. Madison looked smaller than I had ever seen her standing in a room. No Daniel beside her. No engagement ring. No foundation plans to mention. No curated image